welcome to Stressful Conversations, How to Manage Interactions and Protect Your Mental Health. I'm Ala Policastro, Director of Education and Professional Development at the Beverly Hills Bar Association, and I am delighted to introduce our speaker today, Ligaya Lange. Ligaya is the Director of Corporate Outreach for National Alliance on Mental Illness for the Greater Los Angeles County. There, she leads the Stigma-Free Workplace Initiative, designing and delivering customized mental health and wellness programs for organizations. With 15 years of leadership experience in corporate entertainment and consulting, she now focuses on helping professionals reduce stress, strengthen resilience, and foster healthier communications. Ligaya is a passionate advocate for eliminating the stigma surrounding mental health in the workplace. We can't wait to hear what she has to share with us today. Ligaya, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for that great introduction. I'm very happy to be here this evening presenting on this topic of how to manage difficult interactions and communication and not let it impact your mental health. I know particularly for attorneys and younger attorneys and paralegals who are often faced with needing to triage client calls and either expected or unexpected emotional or traumatized or mentally unhealthy clients that you may need to deal with from time to time. This is a great session on just how to cope with these types of stressful conversations. And hopefully you'll come away tonight with some good key takeaways and will be much more comfortable going into your next conversation, either expected or unexpected, that may drive up your anxiety, and you'll have some better coping skills for dealing with these scenarios. So yes, I am the Director of Corporate Outreach for NAMI Greater Los Angeles County. We cover about 70% of Los Angeles. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here with you guys this evening, and thank you for joining. So we can get right into it. I want to emphasize, as we always do at NAMI, that this is a safe space to share and feel comfortable. However, we do have much information to cover. So I think all of your audio is maybe automatically muted. I'm not sure, but we always ask that everybody mute their audio during, if there is an opportunity to contribute, that will come up during the presentation. But I ask that you hold any general questions for me for the end of the presentation during the Q&A session, which we will have. So there's a Q&A little question mark there at the toolbar on the bottom. And so if you have any questions that you would really like me to address in particular, please put them there, and I will do my best to address them at the end. Okay, great. So what are we going to talk about today? So as I said, especially in your industry, whatever type of law that you practice, you deal with stressful communications and interactions, expected, unexpected, and perhaps even need to converse or deal with or interact with someone with a mental health condition. I've been asked by several attorneys, specifically, how should I treat that scenario? How should I speak with that person if I sense that there's something going on? So today we're going to talk about, number one, tools to prepare before difficult conversations. So that's when you know that one is coming up. What can you do to better calm your nervous system and improve your cognitive abilities and just prepare for that type of conversation or interaction? So then what are the strategies to stay grounded during those conversations? I'll go over a brief case study, which most of you have probably come across, the agitated client. We'll go through that and how to handle that situation the best way possible. And that in both an expected and unexpected scenario. And then I do go into number four, how to have a conversation with someone who has a mental illness, especially coming from NAMI and my mental health background and where I work at the moment. I'm very adept at talking about that. And if you have questions about it, again, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A and I can answer at the end. And then after a stressful interaction or conversation, many of us have a way of just moving on to the next thing. And that's really not the best thing to do. So we talk about techniques to actually recover afterward, things you can do in the office or the home office to quickly just bring yourself back to homeostasis, get back down to being your normal calm self and putting things into perspective if need be. We talk about boundaries. Neutral language is a big part of this. We have some resources that you can look at for that. Reframing, again, checking that perspective on what just happened, and building resilience, which is a large part of being able to not only do your type of work in general, but handle these types of difficult conversations and interactions. And then finally, we will go into the Q&A at the end. Okay, so in overall, and I don't think I really need to tell you this, but the challenge is that, as attorneys, you face very emotionally charged, high pressure, high stakes environments, heavy workloads, deadlines, clients that may or may not be extremely emotional, traumatized, at sometimes suffering from a mental illness. So you, no matter what type of law you are in, are facing lots of different types of difficult communications and interactions within your daily work. So the stress from the clients, your colleagues, and opposing parties can be contagious and at times overwhelming. So the objective here, when we're specifically talking about communications and interactions, is to remain composed and effective while maintaining empathy. So, empathy is very important, giving the other person that you're speaking with the feeling that they're being heard and seen. We'll talk about active listening a little bit later, but it's really about maintaining professionalism, empathy, and just grace during the conversation for both your own mental well-being and the person you're speaking with or the person that you're interacting with. In general, as I'm sure you probably know, 71% of lawyers say they suffer from anxiety. 1 in 5 people suffer from a mental health condition. It's highly, highly common. At the end, I will get a little bit into what law firms can do to help their attorneys and their employees with this issue. But 71% of lawyers say they suffer from anxiety, probably not a surprise to anyone on this call. And a leading cause of that anxiety in the legal industry is the emotional burden of your cases, which includes navigating these difficult communications with clients, colleagues, and opposing counsel. A lot of this is that a lot of the communication that you have with other people, whatever they're going through, it gets projected onto you. Whether you're a family lawyer who is dealing with a very emotional divorce case, whether you're an M&A and you're dealing with really complex details, whether you're in property law and extremely detail oriented, or you're in criminal law and there is high stakes, lots of attention on your case, and maybe there's some ethical and moral conflict there. I mean, across the board in the legal industry, no matter what type of lawyer you are facing stress and anxiety and having to deal with difficult communications and interactions on a daily basis. So that's the challenge that we're talking about here. Okay, so as I said, we have unexpected scenarios, we have expected scenarios. So this is going a little bit more into the expected scenario of a difficult conversation or one that you know is going to bring some intensity, may cause some anxiety and some unsettling emotions on your end and on the client's end. And you're just not looking forward to this. So preparing is a very big part. And I know as attorneys, you are always, usually always pressed for time. You're going from call to call, you're moving very fast, you're very perfectionist, or you're probably, a lot of you are perfectionists, and you're trying to make the most of your day and go from one thing to the next to accomplish as much as you can. So taking care of yourself and your emotional state and your mental state is probably, stereotypically not the most popular thing to do, or not the thing that you see most of your colleagues doing if you're in an office environment. So anyway, it's very important that before you go into a known stressful conversation or interaction, that you prepare. And how do you prepare? So you clarify your goals and your potential outcomes. So you never just want to go into a difficult phone call or a difficult meeting blind. And I'm sure that as attorneys, many of you know and don't do this. Um, but if you know the audience that you're expecting and you know what you're trying to accomplish during that, that's always your North Star during these conversations is to always bring yourself back to, okay, what are my goals? What are the potential outcomes? And what is happening when you're during the conversation? You go back to that goals and outcomes, and what is happening during this conversation, and are we moving in that general direction? Um, if you're not, you just have to calmly remind yourself what your objectives are and try to keep things on track. But beforehand, you want to clarify what those are, your goals, your potential outcomes. We call them the North Star of these difficult conversations. Um, if you know of any emotional triggers or sensitive points that may come up in the conversation, definitely prepare yourself for them. Know that this client is going to say, XYZ about their ex or XYZ about the person that they are against. And you're going to need to probably clarify several times for them, what the situation is or whatever it is that you need to communicate to them. Just prepare yourself for that so that you don't get frustrated, you don't get overwhelmed, you don't get annoyed. So, not only do you know what your goals and your objectives are going into the call or the meeting, but you're also aware that there are probably going to be emotional triggers or sensitive points for both of you, both sides. And you just have to prepare yourself for that. And just knowing that ahead of time just helps you to mentally deal with it during. Boundaries are so important. We actually will talk more about boundaries later. Oops, can we just go back? Thank you. Um, Boundaries are so important to maintain boundaries, and you have to establish those ahead of time. So, if it's going to be an in person meeting, safety is always first. I mean, depending on what type of law you do, you may not think that safety is a concern, but sometimes it is. So, safety first. If you're in person, you want to notify your senior partner or maybe have another person, a paralegal in the room with you. Just know that you need to keep yourself safe and keep yourself separate from that person and establish clear boundaries between you as the professional and them as the client or whatever the case may be. And we will talk about more about boundaries and resources for improving how you implement your boundaries later on in the presentation. You want to practice neutral, non judgmental phrasing. So, neutral, non judgmental phrasing, when I say that, it means the following. So, focus on facts and not opinions. That's very important. Maintain an impersonal tone. That's tricky sometimes because in these conversations, you also want to emphasize empathy. So, it's hard to maintain this professionalism and this impersonal tone and also show your empathy, but it is something that takes practice. And all three have to be part of a successful communication, especially when it's posing some difficulty or some stress or anxiety on you. You do want to make the person feel heard, seen, and validated, but you also want to maintain your professionality. You want to maintain your boundaries as being separate from them and being the counsel and being the attorney, and you also want to just keep things, pretty impersonal if you can. But still, it's walking a line, it's a fine line. And as you develop these skills over time, you'll learn how to do it better. But you really want to maintain that professionalism, but also show that you are hearing and seeing them and that you're not just, scribbling notes and listening and trying to get off the call. You're listening to them, active listening, you're using non-judgmental words, you are making them feel heard, seen, and validated, like I said. And then emphasize neutrality instead of persuasion. I'm sure you as attorneys are very familiar with this, but maintaining a neutral stance during the communication is so important so that they don't feel like you're siding with any particular other side other than them, because you need to make sure that they're feeling like you are on their side and you are hearing them. So from the Mental Health First Aid Foundation, which is MHFA, they actually offer classes on these types of skills. So there's 4 tips for non-judgmental listening. I highly encourage you, you'll get these materials after, to click on these hyperlinks and look at the resources. They're very useful. Grounding yourself, the next thing, through breath work or mindfulness. I know this can sound kind of funny, like as if I have time to ground myself and breathe, mindfulness. In particular, I think breath work is fantastic. You can do it anywhere. You can do it in the home office. You can take a couple minutes, close your door, do it in your office. Just any place, go outside and do it. 5 minutes can really regulate your nervous system. And there is actually a guide on breathing techniques for the legal industry. So, again, I highly encourage you to take a look at that guide. There's different types of breathing, box breathing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 breathing, always breathing from your diaphragm instead of through your nose and your mouth. These things may sound a little bit silly and against the grain of how you would usually prepare for a conversation with a client or a colleague, but it is so important to regulate your nervous system. It allows you to be more sharp cognitively, which obviously you want to do. And breathing, going back to the beginning of time, has been used to regulate the nervous system. As you all probably know, if somebody comes into the ER with a panic attack, maybe you don't know this, but one of the first things they try is to put a bag over their face and make sure that they breathe. And it actually can be just as effective as giving them a medication or doing something like that. So don't underestimate the power of breath work. I really highly recommend that you think about taking a couple minutes and breathing prior to these types of interactions and difficult communications. So breathing techniques have been used for centuries to calm the mind and improve overall well-being. These techniques can be simple, yet their effects can be profound. So I cannot emphasize it enough. Mindfulness as well. There are different guides and resources in the appendix for, different ways to ground yourself prior to these conversations. But I highly, highly recommend breathing because you can do that anywhere. So, okay. Okay, so now when it comes to during the conversation, so these are just great tips to remember whether you're prepared to have the conversation or not. We're talking about the ones that are coming, you've got a 10 o'clock meeting with so and so, or you're a paralegal, you're answering the phone, you have a new client, and they want to tell you all about their life story and their case before you can even get, their first and last name. I'm sure that happens. I know it does amongst my my attorney friends. But so when you're in these situations, when you're in these difficult communications, you have to stay grounded. That is the most important thing. So you've done your prep, hopefully, just a couple minutes of prep. But if you haven't, you can still keep these things in mind. So again, slow your pace and breathe intentionally. So there's the breathing again. So talk slowly, talk with intention, really listen to the person that you're speaking with. That's the next one. Listen actively, not reactively. So if you find that this person is talking 1,000 miles a minute, feel free to say things like, okay, I just want to make sure that I'm really understanding what you're saying. Would you mind slowing down a little bit? I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding what you're saying. Would you mind if we take it a bit slower? Would you mind repeating what you just said so that I can ensure that I have it correctly? Things like that, just ways to slow the conversation down, bring it into a pace that's within your control, that's within the type of conversation that you feel comfortable having with that person. Because I'm sure in the many types of law that you practice, you get somebody that's on the phone that is just ready to unload. And the last thing you want to do is take their struggle and their trauma and their difficulty, whatever their situation is, and take it onto yourself. So one of the biggest ways to avoid that situation, because that's where that anxiety comes from, that you're holding, that you take home with you, it's the people that you're dealing with, and it's the clients and the colleagues and the opposing counsel and all of these people that you see throughout your day, and you have these types of stressful interactions and communications with. they're projecting sometimes onto you, and you take on the burden. And what you want to do is control that as much as you can, control your environment as much as you can by breathing, to slowing the pace down, listening actively, not reactively. There is a NAMI guide to active listening that you just can click on here that just differentiates between hearing sounds and listening with intention. And, during a hard and full day at work, sometimes it's hard to, by meeting number 5, listen with intention. But there are some really easy tips and skills in that guide that you can quickly look through. I think it's like a 1-page PDF, and you can look through and just maybe keep it in your office or nearby to remind you, how to keep yourself on task in terms of active listening, because it really helps during these types of conversations. Um, Again, going back to not taking the burden onto yourself, acknowledge emotions without taking them on. So, as I was saying things like, I understand that you're going through this situation and how stressful this must be for you. Just validating their experience and having that empathy. But at the same time, separate yourself. Again, you have to maintain that impersonality. You have to keep yourself separate. So you're acknowledging that they're having a bad day. You're acknowledging that they're in a bad situation. You're acknowledging that maybe they're going through a life crisis that is really taking them off track and really causing a lot of trauma in their own life. But you have to remember that you are not a therapist. And I've had attorneys joke that they are therapists pretty much for their clients. You're not the therapist. You are not meant to analyze their mental state, their family situation, their emotional situation, their entire, whatever their situation is. You're there to do a job. You're their attorney. You're there to advise them in terms of the law and their options. And of course, as a human being, you're also there to empathize with them, to listen to them, to make them feel heard, and show them some grace and acknowledge what they're going through. But you've got to always remember, try very, very hard to compartmentalize and not take their stress onto yourself. And it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice, because then you go home to your family, and of course, if your daughter or son or spouse or what have you comes to you with their bad day, their bad situation, you're going to care so much more. You are going to take that onto yourself. That's enough. You don't need to be also taking on these, the burden of stress from the people that you're dealing with during your workday as much as you can avoid it. So acknowledge emotions during the conversation by saying, I understand what you're going through. I see what you're going through. Oh, that must be so difficult, what you're going through. But these are just things to say. I know it sounds bad, but these are just ways to show that you are there and you're present, but do not take it on yourself. Don't think about it any more than you have to. Um, Again, maintaining a neutral tone. This has to go with your pace and how you control the dynamic of the conversation, but maintaining a neutral tone and a steady posture. So, not moving around, if you're in person, just really maintaining a calm, neutral, steady posture and keeping the pace how you want to keep it, the volume, how you want to keep it, the dynamic, the control is in your hands, really. So you just want to keep these things in mind as you're having the conversation. And then remember, always when they're inevitably in these difficult conversations, they're going to throw questions at you, they're going to throw scenarios at you, so again, in the vein of keeping the conversation at the pace and the volume and the dynamic that you want to keep it, and on the North Star objectives and goals that you're trying to achieve, remember to pause before you respond. Like, you have every right. You do not need to go at the pace they're going at. They're paying you for your advice, they're paying you for your time. And sometimes, you think to yourself, well, I don't want to be on the phone for too long and charge my client too much. And you try to be conscious of that. I have attorneys that have told me that, and I appreciate that very much. But sometimes when I ask a question and then my attorney would pause before answering me, just It's a family law case. I'm unfortunately going through a divorce. Sorry for the TMI, but it is very important to make that person feel heard. And sometimes pausing before you answer them not only gives you the chance to consider what you're going to say, but it actually makes them feel heard. So again, during the conversation, slow your pace, breathe intentionally, learn to listen actively and not reactively. Please access that NAMI guide when you have a chance. Acknowledge the other's emotions while not taking them onto yourself. Maintain a neutral tone, posture, volume, keeping everything as neutral as possible. And the last thing, pause and think about what you're going to say it, before you respond. It's just another way of controlling and keeping the conversation going in the way that you want it to go. Okay, so let's get into like a very popular case study, the upset client scenario. So the agitated client. So let's say you know you're going to have this meeting. You know this client is always upset. This client is always agitated. They're always having a bad day. They always, glass half empty. They're going to come into this negatively, and you're going to have a very unpleasant hour, or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. Okay. So again, you have to prepare. So again, we're going through the steps. So before returning the client's call or meeting them in person, you review the case. And I'm sure that if you have time, this is general, best practice. You review your case, or the paralegal reviews the case, clarifies facts and grounds. Again, I suggest a deep breathing exercise, or there are other ways to ground yourself, resources in the appendix, again, that you can look at. But take the time to prepare. When you know you're going to have a stressful conversation, give yourself maybe 15 minutes prior to that. That may sound like way too long for you, but it can really save you mentally, emotionally, from taking on the stress of that conversation and carrying it through the rest of your day and week, which is not, it's the opposite of what we want. So go through the case, make sure you understand, again, what the details are, clarify what your goals and objectives are to accomplish during the call to make it successful. And then do some grounding exercising, some breathing, some mindfulness, do a meditation, listen to your favorite song, drink a cup of tea, whatever helps you, walk around the building, whatever helps you, do something to ground. During, you've got to listen calmly, use your neutral language, say, I understand this has been frustrating. Again, empathizing with them, avoid any defensiveness. And once the conversation is over, you reflect on what triggered the client's reaction. So every interaction is different, right? So you are going to have a difficult client, a difficult colleague, a difficult person on opposing counsel, or person that you're going to have to deal with multiple times during your work week, and you know who they are, and you know what they're going to bring to the table. And so you prepare for it. You keep yourself neutral and calm and still empathetic during it. And then after, it's really important to reflect on how the conversation went, if it was as you expected, and if there's any new triggers in the conversation where you notice, wow, I said this and that really fired them up. So write that down, or just make sure you remember that for the future, so you know what to avoid or what to maybe rephrase or reframe in the future. So that's a big part of after these conversations. So when the client's upset and they're coming at you, you do your preparation, you keep the key things in mind during, actively listening, using neutral language, keeping your posture, your volume, everything neutral, and showing empathy, making them feel heard. And then also, pausing before you answer things. And then after, it's really important to reflect on how the conversation went and if there were any new triggers identified. And the outcome will usually be that the client feels heard and it de-escalates. So as soon as they see, okay, this person is calm, they're reacting off of you, you're reacting off of them. So it's like any interaction we have. If someone's coming at you with high energy and anxiety, it's going to immediately trigger you to sort of have the same energy and anxiety, or at least feel that energy and anxiety within yourself, and you're thinking, oh no, this is not what I want. But if you, again, control that dynamic with the things we've spoken about so far, you likely the client is going to match you. So that's why you have to go in prepared so that you have the chance to, since you're grounded, you're calm, you're neutral, you're probably going to help that person sitting across from you or on the other line understand that, being agitated and being frustrated and coming at you with a million scenarios and questions or whatever they're going to do, anger, resentment, whatever, is probably not going to be that effective because you're not responding to it. So they de-escalate. It actually de-escalates the situation. And with the empathy that you're showing and the neutral language, the client feels heard and they feel validated. The attorney, again, you maintain your composure and your professionalism. And once you reflect on how the conversation went, you can develop a follow-up plan on how to create and improve communication in the future. So this says communication timelines, but I just think in the future with this client, I take notes on my partners and who I'm speaking with and just their communication techniques and how our interactions tend to be. And I prepare and I do these same things during the conversation to keep things grounded and calm. And I always reflect after. And yeah, I suggest that you as attorneys do the same in these types of interactions. Okay, so sometimes younger associates. I have a few corporate partners who are attorneys in the field, and they always say, it's really our paralegals and our younger associates that have to deal with the stress of answering the phone and not knowing who's on the other end, or dealing with the new clients, or just the day to day emailing, phone calls. The meeting is, I think, is usually with the attorney, but the paralegals and the younger associates who are, maybe not as high up at the firm, they're dealing more with the people, the clients on the day to day basis, as from what I understand. And so many of you younger associates and paralegals are subject to this scenario of when you're surprised by having to deal with an agitated client or you're not expecting it. You're having a fine morning and you pick up the phone and this person is not happy, not calm, wants to really, let it all out in front of you. And you're just this innocent bystander who now has to deal with this. Or you have to deal with somebody that's known to be difficult over email and you're anticipating it and it's coming every day, but you don't know when. So how do you deal with this? It's much the same as what I've been saying, but this quote is really, when a paralegal is surprised by an agitated client, again, they should remain calm and professional while prioritizing their safety and the client's emotional state. The best approach is to de-escalate the situation through active listening, setting your boundaries, and then reporting the incident to their supervising attorneys. That's the one difference. If you're a younger attorney, you probably have a supervising attorney and you want to let them know that this person is particularly agitated, difficult to deal with. But you're going to use the same strategies. Controlling the conversation during, maintaining your professionalism, your boundaries, validating their emotion while not taking it on. So important. Takes time to learn, compartmentalizing that, not taking it on to yourself. And then reflecting on the conversation, and we will talk about this later, doing something to decompress from that unpleasant moment in your day. You've had the conversation, you've had the interaction, it was stressful, you weren't expecting it. There are things you can do after to recover from that, whether it's talking to a supportive colleague or calling your mom, calling your husband, wife, or going for a walk outside and getting a coffee, or again, breath work, listening to some music on Spotify, calming music. Just do something to separate yourself from what just happened. Because the more that we just move through our day collectively, taking on all of these stresses and anxieties, they don't go anywhere. They just stay with us until we actively do something to purge them. So the way you do that is by doing some decompression. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So there's a link there to paralegal strategies for dealing with difficult clients. Again, highly recommend you click on that. There's some great tips there. Okay, so I've been asked since I work for NAMI in particular, um, how do you talk to a client with a mental illness? So, depending on what type of law you're in, you may or may not come across a client or a colleague or somebody that you need to talk to or have an interaction with who is, you know, suffering from a mental illness or a mental condition. And how you know that, how, you either know they have a diagnosis because like you've been told, they've told you, they're public about it, or maybe in the beginning of the case, they let you know, or it's in the notes that they have a mental health condition. Or sometimes just as you meet someone, you may just sense it. You may know this person is in an episode, or they're in a manic, very high episode, or they're in a depressive, very low episode, or they're very, angry out of nowhere, or they're just having, extreme anxiety. And we all know those signs. All know when we're talking to somebody who is unfortunately suffering and struggling more than is normal. So when it goes into the category of where you believe or that you are communicating or interacting with somebody who does in fact have a mental health condition or a mental illness, um, this is what you can do. This is what NAMI especially would advise. So you start with your active listening. So you have to keep these communication tips in mind. You start with your active listening, not just hearing sounds, but actively listening with intention. Use non-stigmatizing language. So stigmatizing language is language that makes them feel like they're immediately on the defense, or they are not being heard, seen, or validated, that that they are being treated differently because they have a mental health condition or what have you. So that's things like, you're depressed versus, I understand you're living with depression. Very, very different. That's going to be taken very different. Remain calm and use an even tone of voice. So again, going back to that neutrality, that professionalism, that keeping yourself separate as a professional. So remaining calm, controlling your demeanor, controlling your volume, controlling the speed at which you speak, the pace. They will react to you, even if they are in the middle of a mental health crisis. Um, this may not pertain to attorneys for the most part. It's part of my general presentation on how to have these difficult interactions, but I don't know if you're allowed or if you feel comfortable sharing your own story or relating to somebody, as as a human being, can be very, very powerful. And it can immediately de escalate a situation where somebody feels alone and on the defense, and like they're talking to you as their attorney, and they're trying to make sure they get every detail in and get heard. And they want you to empathize with them and really understand what they're going through. So, one of the best ways to just, is to just address that right away, is to share your own story or relate, or perhaps I know, perhaps reference another case without referencing. I don't know if you're allowed to do this, but perhaps reference, yes, I've seen this in different cases and I know it's difficult, but, making them feel like you're in the right hands, you're at the right place. I understand what you're going through. I understand what you're feeling, but still keeping things calm and keeping things in the right pace and keeping that North Star of objectives, in play, even though you may be dealing with somebody who is in the midst of a mental illness. But I can't tell you enough how, in general, when we're talking about communicating with someone with a mental illness, sharing your own story and relating to them can really help and de escalate what may be an unpleasant or difficult conversation. Because the minute you make somebody feel heard and validated, it just takes a weight off of everything. It takes a weight off of them. You see their reaction or hear it, you see they're more at ease. It takes a weight off of you. It kind of resets you. So if you have the opportunity or you're allowed to relate to them in some way, talk about a case that you are struggling with something similar in or have, You don't have to share obviously names or details, or just your own story. I mean, no one can stop you from sharing what you want from yourself. Those are your own limits and your own boundaries. And if you feel comfortable, go ahead. I mean, again, I'm not an attorney, but I can't tell you how powerful it is when you relate to somebody. This most successful outcome will occur when active listening, empathy, which is a big part of sharing your own story, and making the person feel heard is accomplished. So that's the most important thing with someone who is struggling, is to say, I can see that you're struggling. I have also struggled, or I know someone else who has struggled. Let's talk about this. I understand. I see what you're going through. I hear you. Here are your options as the attorney. Here are your options. Let's discuss your options. And then again, reflect on that conversation, maybe ask advice from a colleague or a senior partner. And again, it takes practice. But as you deal with people who have mental health conditions, which is 1 in 5 people, 20% of the population, it's going to happen. You just have to employ these same techniques that you're hearing from me over and over again. There's 2 guides here that I reference: Words Matter, How to Use Inclusive Language When Talking About Mental Health. And this NAMI, Navigating a Mental Health Crisis, is a rather verbose, long guide, but a very good and worthwhile read. So please do take a look at those 2 guides when you have a chance and have them handy. It's only going to help you. Okay, so as I was talking about decompression, recovering after the conversation, this is so important, especially for type A perfectionist people like me, attorneys who are probably like that. Very many of you are like that as well. You want to just wrap one thing up, go to the next thing. I'll deal with that later. Oh, that bothered me. I'll deal with it later. Oh, I'll tell somebody about that later. There are ways to help yourself recover without having anybody else there, that will just help you to move on, really move on from that difficult or traumatic or that anxiety provoking interaction or conversation that you just had. And it's really important when you have them and you're reflecting on it to give yourself that 5 or 10 minutes to reflect and decompress. So, reflect, number one, reflect, but don't ruminate. Don't don't go down the hole, don't spiral, don't, all of these words, but make sure that you're thinking about what just happened, but that it doesn't take over your day. It doesn't take over the rest of the conversations and interactions you have to have. You're not carrying that burden with you for the rest of the day. Reframe, number 2, reframe negative interactions as learning moments. So instead of kicking yourself for what you could have done better, or, oh, why did I pick up the phone? Why did I email them back? Why didn't I pause before I press send? Whatever you think, just use it as a learning moment. Like I said, all of these things take practice and time. So use it as a learning moment. I mean, you're going to use this over what, a 40-year career, right? Maybe, plus or minus. So you have time to learn these techniques. So reframe these negative, difficult conversations as learning moments. And when you start to look at them as learning moments or opportunities to do better next time, like you're taking notes on the same situation and every time you're improving, it's so much better than just dread and just negative feeling towards a certain opposing counsel, colleague, or client. It's better to say, okay, I'm preparing, I've got my objectives, I know how I'm going to handle the conversation. Okay, it's done, I've reflected. I'm going to look at the different ways of looking at this. And one of them is to look at it as a learning moment and not as a difficult, awful experience that you just had and may have to have again. Grounding and calming activities for the office include focusing on the 5 senses with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, deep breathing, again, my favorite, progressive muscle relaxation. These are all things you can do at your desk. Stretching or taking a mindful walk, just walk to Starbucks and think about, separating yourself from what just happened and reframing it as a learning moment again. You can also engage your senses by holding a smooth object. A lot of people don't know this. Savoring a beverage, tea is I highly recommend that. We have enough coffee in our lives, I think. So tea much better, I always say. It can also have very good aromatic features to help you calm down, help your nervous system return to normal, or just listening to calming sounds. I always put on, just piano on my Spotify or the harp or just relaxing spa music. And it really helps. It just helps your mind wander away from whatever it was you just experienced. So you have to do these things though. You really have to incorporate, what are my favorite ways to ground myself? What are my favorite ways to decompress? So, what's my best way to prep? What's my best way to recover? And once you've identified those things and you make them part of your routine, it's like they always say, 9 times makes a habit, or whatever you believe. It could take a little, for me, it takes a couple, well, it takes longer than that. But if you keep practicing these skills, and I do encourage you to click on that link for more information, it's important and you will learn how to have better control and measure over these types of interactions. Seeking collegial help. So, collegial, I love that word, but all that means is support amongst your workplace. There's another statistics that says, that 65% of people say that their colleagues and their relationships at work matter just as much as their friends and their private relationships away from work, and that many of their greatest friends come from their workplace because you're going through similar experiences. So it's always great to know someone that you can just IM, instant message, text, walk into their office, have a little debrief, talk about it, because they're going to know how you feel. They've dealt with similar situations. There's no shame in that. Just having somebody to talk to. If you are working remotely, we will talk about this later, but it is up to leadership to also create some sort of communal environment in law firms so that associates do interact with each other, paralegals, associates, younger attorneys, especially who are dealing with some of these unpleasant communications, do have community and do have support to go to. And then finally, releasing residual tension by movement. So again, going on a walk, stretching, journaling, like as if you have time to journal in your day, but maybe later during the evening, just writing down your day's events and reframing them as a learning moment again, and having a different perspective about what happened so that you can move on from it and you don't carry it with you. And mindfulness. Again, so many links and required reading in the appendix that will help you with all of these things. But it's so important to decompress and to recover after a stressful interaction or communication. So long-term resilience is a big part of this as well. I know we're running out of time here and I want to have time for Q&A. So again, develop emotional awareness through mindfulness. Strengthen professional boundaries. There is a guide on how to implement your boundaries, so please look at that. Your boundaries are very important. Rehearse high stress scenarios calmly. So again, when you know what to expect, when you know you're going into a high stress conversation or interaction, give yourself the time to prepare and rehearse. It cannot hurt, it can only help you. Prioritize your regular self-care practices. In general mental health, we always say sleep, diet, exercise. It's all important. I know as an attorney, you're crunched for time and maybe you don't have time to do all these things, but it is all about your mental health and being able to maintain this type of stress over a long and hopefully successful career. So you have to augment your lifestyle to allow you to do that. So self-care in general, and just Google that if you don't know what it is. I'm sure you do. Taking care of yourself, getting your adequate sleep, eating a good diet, exercising if and when you can, and doing anything else that helps separate you from the work environment and helps bring you home to homeostasis, calm, what gives you peace. And creating that peer network, like I just said, for debriefing support. So important to feel that you have community. So there's those two quotes and statistics there. I like this one, studies by Gallup found that employees with a best friend at work are more engaged. And research from the Harvard Business Review shows that strong peer relationships can reduce employee turnover by up to 50%. I worked at Fox Studio for about 15 years. And I will say one of the reasons I stayed that long is because of my peers and the people I met along the way. Sometimes did not want to be there other than the people. That's what brought me back every day. And it doesn't have to be that different in a law firm either. The bottom line is that firm leadership must prioritize community amongst employees and create opportunities for their staff to connect, even if working remotely most of the time. So we know that about 40% of Americans are still working remotely. We have to make sure that if that's the environment, that we're creating opportunities for them to get to know each other, maybe even putting them in groups where they live near each other, or whatever you can do to foster that community and to make sure that they have the support they need so they have someone to go to when they are dealing with these difficult and stressful conversations and interactions on a daily basis. Okay, so takeaways for attorneys. So these are just some closing thoughts here. Reduce reactivity and preserve professionalism. Prevent other stress from becoming your own. I'm repeating the things I've said the whole presentation, so I'm hoping you see the consistency here. Um, we have the NAMI guide for setting boundaries, as I referenced earlier. Oops, that color is not very easy to see, but please click on that and take a look at it. It should be given to you as a supplementary material that I gave to Suzanne, so you should have that. Communicate with greater calm and clarity. Again, the conversation, the interaction is really in your hands once you take the reins and you control the way you're speaking, the volume you're speaking at, the pace you're speaking at. It's all about that. So communicate with greater calm, clarity, your posture, everything has to be about creating that sense of calm. Strengthen both mental health and professional effectiveness. And what does that mean? Again, be sure that you are not only getting your CLE credits and that you're winning your cases and that you're doing well at work, but you're also doing your self-care, because your self-care is going to allow yourself to be the best you can in the workplace. The more that you eat, sleep, and you eat the right diet, sleep the adequate amount, get some exercise, get those endorphins. They're very effective, truly. I can say that as a runner. It's very important to do your self-care. It will help you become professionally more effective the more balanced you are. Work-life balance is a whole other presentation. So important though. So any education you can get yourself on that or implementing that type of thing in your life, so important. So the closing thought, you can't control every conversation, but you can control the presence that you bring to it. So again, just want to remind all of you that especially when you have a difficult client or a colleague or someone that you know is going to be difficult, or when you have it come unexpectedly, it's not all out of your hands and you just have to deal with it. You just have to come what may. That's not the case. If you practice these skills for preparation, how to behave during, and how to reflect after and decompress, you take these conversations and interactions more into your own hands and you're able to control how these conversations go, and giving yourself the time to reflect how perhaps they can go better in the future and how you can handle yourself better in the future. And you'll get to know what your coping mechanisms are and what your preparation looks like, whether it's breathing, meditation, whatever, and how you reflect afterwards and you decompress and recover. So it's your presence and what you bring to these interactions that will really be what tells, what comes out of it. You ultimately are in control. So you have to remember that. Okay, so really quick, this is a verbose slide. All I have to say is mental health is something that, there's some statistics here on the left. I'm going to let you guys go ahead and read through them, but poor mental health, $33 million annually by staffing costs across the country. It can really, I think across the country, it's more in billions, but I think in this particular study, it cost the firms $33 million annually in absenteeism and just hidden sunk costs for poor mental health. There is a 400% ROI established in the most current statistics and studies. For every $1 invested in scaling up treatment for depression and anxiety leads to return of $4 in better health and ability to work, according to a WHO-led survey. You can click on all these and see the literature in the back. So the bottom line is, what can you do to help? Mental health can't be ignored in the workplace, in law firms. Having mental health insurance coverage and perhaps an EAP offering is often not enough anymore across the board. Only I think 7% of people use their EAP, and about 65% of employees don't know where to access their EAP, sorry, or their mental health benefits. They just don't even know. And especially in law firms, the stereotype of an attorney having everything together, being a perfectionist, type A personalities, they don't, it's not popular to get treatment. There may be a fear of that stigma. So you have to offer more than that. So research and contact local mental health organizations and nonprofits who may offer corporate wellness programs. It's what I do. There are others of me across Los Angeles County. There's help out there for your companies if you'd like to implement a mental health and wellness program. So I highly suggest that you look into that. The ROI is so good, and sometimes you never know someone's struggling until they quit or they go on a leave of absence and it's too late. So if you can get them into treatment sooner than later, or get them resources and support, that's good. It can only be a win for you. Law firms that implement mental health programs report improved financial and operational success, including increased productivity, better employee retention, and a more positive client outcomes. Who can ask for more than that? So that's got an asterisk. The source for that is in the appendix. You can go through that if you would like. These programs help reduce burnout, which is one of the number one mental health issues for attorneys, and stress, leading to a clearer thinking and better decision making amongst legal staff, which in turn creates a more resilient and engaged workforce and strengthens the firm's bottom line. So, moral of the story is, leaders, firm leadership, please don't ignore mental health. These stressful conversations, these stressful interactions happen on a daily basis, no matter what type of law you're practicing, and especially your younger attorneys, your paralegals are dealing with it. You can only win by recognizing mental health in your firm and implementing a wellness program. It's a win-win for everyone. Okay. So thank you. That is my presentation. Please stay connected. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Again, I'm the Director of Corporate Outreach for NAMI Greater Los Angeles County. My name is Ligaya Lange. My email is right there. Please use it. I am always on my email, as I'm sure you are as well, even when I shouldn't be. But please let me know if you have any questions. And now there are some questions in the Q&A. So let me take a look here. Let me look here. I may have to save this and answer some of these directly. Any particular advice for dealing with a narcissist whose basic pattern is to speak over and cut off all other participants in a conference? Unfortunately, very familiar with this. So one of the personality disorders, narcissism. Yes, some people, they do speak out of turn, and they do run over, and they do talk over people. And so at a conference, in that kind of setting, I'm actually at the California NAMI conference right now, and I hope we don't have this happen. But what we do is we maintain composure. We walk over there where they have the mic, and we tell them, we appreciate what you're saying. We understand what you're saying. We know it's an issue, what you're saying. And maybe there's another avenue for you to communicate to this audience. In our case, maybe, there is a way to speak to a different colleague about this and have a one-on-one meeting, or, write something that maybe is a mass email to everybody. Again, that's at your discretion, but offer them a different avenue and just tell them that unfortunately right now is not the time and place, and that you have to consider all of the other people and all of the other things on the agenda that you need to get through, but you do appreciate and understand and hear them. So again, it's about making them feel validated. I know you say use neutral language, but how do you feel about saying something like, I'm sorry you're going through that. I'm sorry you're going through that, as a way to make a connection with someone, or I'm sorry that happened. That is totally neutral. You can say that. That's absolutely acceptable, at least from what I know in my mental health profession. Of course you're sorry. That is a natural, way to express that you hear them and that you see the difficult experience they're going through. And it also isn't you taking it on. You're just saying, you're acknowledging, you're saying, I'm sorry. First of all, I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry that you're going through that. And pause and take a moment and either look in their eyes or take a moment on the phone to let them respond to that. And that conversation will probably de-escalate whatever is happening or just make them feel at peace. And again, bring that control of that dynamic and that situation back to you. I absolutely think that that's fine. How do we not take things personally? It is impossible, Joseph, not to take things personally. However, you can carry it for a limited amount of time. Oh, okay. It says that the Beverly Hills Bar is going to answer this. Any tips on not ruminating? Yes. Setting a time limit for how long you are going to think about this. Give yourself the walk to Starbucks and the coffee if you must, but do not give it any more time than that. If it helps you to get things out by writing things down and putting them somewhere where you can reference them later so you know you got it out, then do that. But limit the time you're allowed to think about something so that you can allow yourself to move on. That's so important. Okay. Am I answering the ruminating one or maybe not? No. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you for
excuse
the
me,
session.
Ligaya.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
for those questions, I'm just creating timestamps. So you're more than welcome to answer these questions. That's me
Oh,
creating.
okay. I just thought that said, don't answer that, Ligaya. Okay, so any tips on not ruminating? Again, just like what I just said about I think I just answered that. Did I just answer that question or did I answer a different question? Because I think there was one on not taking anything personally as well.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so ruminating, put a timestamp on it. Do not allow yourself to go beyond like a certain number of minutes. Write it down, do something to get rid of it so you can move on. So that's how you don't ruminate and let it control your day. I think I already said that. Okay, so everybody's going to take things personally. Their clients should not be attacking you personally. Colleagues shouldn't be attacking you personally. It may happen more amongst colleagues or opposing counsel more so than a client. I don't know. I'm not an attorney. But again, it's about not taking their burden and making it your own. So you have to remember that that person, if you're keeping yourself calm and centered and grounded, then likely the reason for the disruption and the agitation and the anxiety is coming from the opposite side. So they're very likely going to try to project onto you. And that may include, saying something or doing something that you take personally. And you just have to hone that skill. Just give yourself only a limited amount of time to think about this and maybe go to a trusted colleague or friend to talk about it and kind of decompress from it. That's part of decompressing and reflecting. That's part of reflection and decompression. Doing what you need to do to separate yourself from that unpleasant thought of, oh, that just didn't feel good. That it was personal to me. There are ways to actually separate from that moment. And a lot of it has to do with limiting the amount of time you think about it, remembering that that person was extremely at the frame of mind that person was in when they made that comment, whatever made you feel that you were taking this personally, it's probably coming from the other side, and you don't need to take that onto yourself. That is not something that you should take onto yourself. Remember that separation and boundaries, and that you are your professional self, and that client or colleague or boss or whoever it is a completely different person than you and is bringing a lot of unknown factors into the room, into the interaction and the conversation. So that's my advice there. My most difficult conversations are with senior partner at the small firm. The senior partners wanted to, I'm just going to read this. Okay, well, that's very dismissive. Yes. He may have disagreed with my suggestion, but it is not true that it made no sense. I'm the only female attorney. Oh. No. So my personal opinion on this is that, well, there you have multiple issues. Is one is you're the only woman, you're older, and probably more. I mean, how do I say this? Maybe a more polite generation than we have now, with our immediateness and our impulsiveness that we have going on in millennials and Gen Z. I'm not sure what generation you're in, but it's definitely proven that we had better manners before. So I'm sorry that you were going through that. I mean, all of this sounds difficult. I would always, always say to advocate for yourself, because when you're not advocating for yourself, you are taking that emotional burden and holding on to it, and you're bringing it to work every day. And I would say maybe this isn't the right place for you to work, but life is just not that simple. We know the job market is so harsh. And this may be a learning moment for your senior partner, and for you, to advocate for yourself and to actually set up a meeting between you and that senior partner that is usually difficult, and utilize all the skills we just talked about: preparation, identifying what the trigger points are likely going to be and how you're going to handle that. Make suggestions. What's your objective? What do you want to achieve? What's your North Star? Preparing for the conversation. Go through this deck again. Preparing for the conversation ahead of time, doing your breath work, meditation, listening to music, drinking your tea, whatever it takes to get you as grounded as possible. And then, like I said, during the conversation, it's very difficult to stand up for yourself sometimes. It's very difficult to advocate for yourself, especially to someone senior to you who usually dismisses you. I think it's very fair to say that I don't feel that anything I've ever put in front of you makes no sense. So when you answer me saying that it makes no sense, it feels extremely, and you need to communicate the feeling. It feels extremely dismissive, and it makes me want to, however you want to communicate it, just succinctly, directly, strongly, confidently, maintain your posture, your professionalism, and your pace, and don't bring emotionality into this. It's a fact. This person continually dismisses you. You know for a fact that what you're saying makes sense, and you're not getting the respect you need or deserve. You're not feeling heard. And, you can say something like, I believe that, you don't have the best communication skills for a manager, and it's very difficult for me to communicate with you. And if it's a person who wants the firm to be successful or has any type of empathy whatsoever, they'll hear you. And it's about you taking that opportunity to advocate for yourself, using the skills we identified to have the difficult conversation: preparing, grounding, reflecting, recovering. And then take notes from that conversation and see how it goes. See how maybe you can make conversations better with this person in the future. I definitely think you should address it. That's just my opinion, though.
Alrighty, so
Okay.
it does look like we are definitely at time. Thank you so much, Ligaya, for your time today and for taking the
Thank
time
you.
to, go through all of the questions that our members have provided today. Thank you so much to our members for joining us this evening as well. If you do have any questions that pop up, of course, after this presentation, feel free to reach out to Ligaya at her email on the slide provided. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.